welcome you to our second session of the module 6 on multidisciplinary care for children victims of violence. We are going to continue exploring ways to promote easier access to child victims of violence to quality support services in the areas of health, social protection, and criminal justice. We have the pleasure to have for our two last sessions of the online course, the foundation, A Breeze of Hope. A Breeze of Hope has an extensive experience in Bolivia and does a holistic and multidisciplinary work, which will be presented during the sessions. In addition, the work of A Breeze of Hope is a good example for us, as we have seen the 7 strategies to end violence against children, because their work reflects how a civil society organization has been implemented all 7 strategies. There will be 2 different sessions facilitated by A Breeze of Hope Foundation. One that we have today on the access to mental health and social service support for child survivors of sexual violence. And the second and last one on access to justice for child survivors of sexual violence. So today we have the pleasure to welcome Brisa de Angulo. She's founder and CEO of A Breeze of Hope Foundation. So Brisa, you have the floor, and you can present maybe more, say more about you if you want. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much for having me here. It is a pleasure to be able to share and learn also from you all and be able to share what we've been doing. So I just want to clarify that if there's any questions as we're going, my intentions is this to be a dialogue and be able to build over what we're talking. So if there's any specific questions, please put them in the chat, or if you want to raise the hand just to, the little symbol hand, just to call my attention that there's something that is not clear or something that you want me to go more in depth. It's a very short time for presentation, so I'm trying to go as simple to not go in depth, but if there's something that you would like me to go more in depth, I am very happy to do that. A little bit about myself and a little bit about what A Breeze of Hope is. I am one of the first adolescents in Bolivia who disclosed sexual violence and incest case, and there was a lot of threats and desire to silence me from the community, from the government, and especially from my extended ex-family, which is something that we see in cases of incest. The family is the one trying to silence the victim. And in that process, my life went downhill. I dropped from high school. I tried to commit suicide. And it was in this process of me trying to take my case to court and trying to look for services and not finding one institution in the country that took this kind of cases that I decided with my parents to start the first and only program for children who've been sexually abused. And to tell you the truth, when we started 20 years ago, what I desired was to have a place where I could tell children, you're not alone and this is not your fault, which is something that I wish so bad that I could have heard and I didn't hear. And then from there, I continue my judicial process, which 20 years is still open. But I also start realizing that I wasn't the only one, that in fact, this is a huge problem. Child sexual violence is a huge, underreported, unseen problem. And with the support of my parents and other people who started believing in me, I was able to go and get my education, But I wanted to tell you specifically about something that happened in those times where, I was suicidal and hating myself and just not wanting to feel the pain anymore. I was staying with a social worker, and she had to go to a training, and she was too scared to leave me at the house because she was scared I was going to do something to myself. And she forced me to go to this training, and it changed my life because the training was about how trauma affects the brain. And for the first time, I understood that a lot of what I was going through and a lot of what I was feeling, a lot of the emotions that I have and the views that I have, it wasn't me. It wasn't my fault. It was my brain. My brain had been hurt in a way that was now interpreting things different. And since that moment, I knew that I had to find the way so that I could let other survivors know the impact that trauma has on the brain, because it changed my life. I stopped hating my life, myself, and I found something that I can do something different. So I went into getting my GED because I was a dropout student. And then I went to do my college, and then I went to do my master's in neuropsychology, where it was all about the brain and trauma. And then I went to go my PhD with the legal a law degree. And then, so I became my own lawyer to take my case. But simultaneously, while I was doing all these things, we also were running the program for children who've been sexually abused. So not only was I working on my own healing and trying to figure out how to deal with my life, but at the same time, I was doing research and learning and studying and writing books and doing things to be able to base everything that we do on scientific research, neuroscience. And at the same time, simultaneously, we had hundreds of children. We've already had over 2,000 children who were going through the same experiences, and working with them to see how do we put all these three things together. So we started a Brisa of Hope. And right now, a Brisa of Hope is a recognized worldwide institution as one of the institutions that uses the best practices based on research. We have been able to publish over 30 books on the topic. We have been recognized by international entities. And my desire now is to be able to share what we do, how we do it. And it is one of my biggest passions. And yeah, I feel very fortunate that I will be sharing with you today. So I'm going to share my PowerPoint and I will start. So I'll be talking today about the holistic approach to healing. And this is a big topic for me, because we know that when people ask, what is healing, or what do I need to heal? It is such a loaded question, because healing is a lifelong process. You don't do one thing to heal. You work on the healing process for the rest of your life. And it's, one thing that has been very clear to us is that the way therapy has been working hasn't worked. And this was a big thing for me. When I disclosed sexual violence, in all this chaos, my parents tried to support me, and they would send me to therapists. And honestly, I detested going to therapy. I hated it. I knew I had to go because supposedly it was going to help me. And then it also gave some peace to my parents' mind. But I hated going to therapy. I feel like I was being treated like one more number, one more case. I learned very fast to read what the therapist wanted me to say, and I would say what she wanted to say. I learned very fast to feel where I felt her judgment, so that I will, instead of working on myself, I will be trying to justify and explain why I did certain things or I didn't do certain things. And I went to over 7 therapists. And the honest truth is that I decided to study psychology because my idea when I was a teenager and adolescent, I said I had to learn about my enemy to destroy my enemy. Well, my view has changed a lot, but to me, there's one therapist that changed the way that I see everything. I went to talk to her and I told her what was going on and everything. And as I was talking, her eyes started tearing up. And for the first time, after years of me telling my story and hoping to get some type of, emotional breakthrough, when I saw her cry, it was the first time that I gave myself permission to hurt. When I saw her angry about what had happened to me, and you could see literally in her face, it was the first time that I felt that I could feel angry about what happened to me. And that feeling of saying, you get it, that really transformed the way that I started seeing and saying, this is what children need. This is what healing is about. So I'm going to start just talking a little bit about what I'm going to talk today. We're going to talk a little bit about the magnitude of child sexual violence, the impact of trauma, and what we need to heal. What is the scientific research showing, neuroscience showing? I'm going to specifically talk about the polyvagal theory and the bottom-up approach, which are two fundaments of what we do, and how can we use these two approaches into a day-to-day operations, and how do we use it with the thousands of children that we work. Approximately 1 in every 4 girls and 1 in every 6 boys are sexually abused before the age of 18. However, organizations that work with children have more like 1 of every 3 girls and 1 of every 4 boys are sexually abused before the age of 18. So I would like to see if you could put in the chat box, what do you think is the most dangerous place for a child to be sexually abused? Whoops. Yeah. I mean, how sad is that? The most dangerous for a child to be is at their own home. The second dangerous and the third dangerous is the schools and the churches. 63 to 73% of children are sexually abused in their own homes by a family member, an incest situation. So that it's the place where this should be the safest place is actually the most dangerous place for a child. So this should alarm us, and we should really start working and thinking, how do we work and change these places? Because this is where our children should be protected and is where they are being the most hurt. 60 to 70% of victims of sexual violence never disclose. And this is very important to realize, because one of the most common things that victims of sexual violence hear is, why didn't you say when it happened? Or why didn't you tell? Maybe you liked it. And we hear of a lot of women who tell about their sexual experience 20, 30, 40 years later, and then they get blamed or not believed because they took so long to disclose. Well, the norm is that most people don't disclose sexual violence. And from those who disclose, so from that small percentage that disclose, only 10 to 18% reported to authorities. So most of them go unreported to authorities, and most of them don't have any type of legal solutions. So sexual assault, it is the most underreported crime in the entire world. And it's probably one of the highest crimes in the world. The impact of sexual violence is huge. I'm not going to read the list, but you can look at the list. These are some of the consequences of being sexually abused. People suffer from anxiety, PTSD, smoking, homelessness, delinquent behavior, low grades in school, conflictive behavior. So the list is huge. The impact that it has 20, 30 years later, it's huge. And I'm going to explain a little bit about how this happens. So the person suffers trauma, and the trauma deregulates the central nervous system, and it creates the body to send wrong messages. These wrong messages, the deregulation of the central nervous system, changes the physiology and the functions of the brain. It literally changes parts of the brain. For example, there are studies that show that children who have been sexually abused have a 17% lower corpus callosum, which is what connects the left side of the brain, has a 17% reduction. They also show how there's a reduction of the hippocampus. And there's also like images like this one where there is damages on the temporal lobe. So it changes, by the trauma changes our body response, our central nervous system, and that changes the physiology and the function of our brain. That physiology and function of the brain makes us react in different ways to cope with these messages that our body is sending us. And that is what creates a lot of the very negative behavior and practices. It starts from like isolation, from getting into combative situations, trying to numb the pain, not trying to numb what's going on by taking drugs, alcohol, homelessness. There's so many impacts of having constantly wrong messages from the brain of what's happening. I think someone's sending a message and I'm like, okay. Okay, so what are some of the reasons why children don't break the silence? So there's several reasons. Very common reasons, very big reasons are that many children don't know that what's happening to them is sexual violence. I was repeatedly raped for over 8 months, hundreds of times. And I did not know that what was happening to me was rape. I knew I didn't like it. I knew I hated it, but it was done by a trusted adult in my family who happened to be also a youth pastor. So there was no reason for me to think that that was considered rape, that just because I said no or just because I didn't want it, it came from someone who was supposed to love me, to protect me, and take care of me. So that's one of the big reasons. Many children are being sexually abused and have no idea that what's happening to them is a crime and that they can ask for help. So that is one of the big things, the lack of awareness. Another thing is the stigma of how society responds. We all know that if a victim breaks the silence, the victim is the one being punished. It is society who starts saying, maybe she wanted it, maybe she's lying. Everybody punishes the victim. And when we see other victims being blamed, other victims being destroyed because they had the courage to break the silence, we think 2 or 3 times before we tell our stories, because maybe our lives will be destroyed too. So those are 2 main reasons as to why they don't break silence. So going back to this image, so we know trauma creates a deregulation of the central nervous system, which changes the physiology and function of our brain. And that change of our function makes us react in ways that are not, that are negative behaviors, or behaviors that are trying to numb the problem. So for example, we start perceiving something as a threat, and it's not a threat, but because we perceive it as a threat, we react in a way that is violent, or we start getting into arguments with people, and that affects us with our marital problems and with job problems. And because of that, we want to isolate because we don't have the capacity to deal and relate with others. And all these actions that we take to try to cope with what's happening is also a way of producing another trauma. Because every time we engage in a negative way with another person or with ourselves, we keep harming ourselves. And it's another small trauma that continues creating the deregulation of the central nervous system, that continue creating an impact of the brain that exacerbate all these problems. The CDC, which is the biggest organization in the United States, the Center for Disease Control, have found that people who've had adverse experiences like child sexual violence in their childhood tend to have the 10 leading risk behaviors for life. So we know that these behaviors are consequences of the trauma that happened. Having these behaviors take us to have mental and health problems. So for example, if someone is a part of the coping mechanism, drinking a lot, we will have liver problems. Someone who is dealing with smoking a lot, they tend to have COPD, pulmonary obstructive problems. And so it's like our behaviors are the reactions we're trying to have to numb or to deal and cope with all this mess that's going on in our brain take us to develop the diseases and mental diseases. And we all know that when we develop a disease and be diagnosed with a mental disorder or a disease, that in itself is another trauma. Someone diagnoses with cancer or fibromyalgia or whatever that we get a label, that is another thing of saying, my body sucks. I suck. I am a problem. I have so much willingness to be different, but I just can't. I am a failure. And so one of the big problems is that as the person develops these diseases, what we have found is that having this makes you also continue and exacerbating all these negative problems. So everybody knows if you have a headache, you're going to be more irritable with everybody who's around you. Nobody was going to want to be alone around you, and you're going to want to be alone and depressed, and then you're going to want to overeat because you want to like be away from everyone. So it just continues. It's this cycle that continues making everything worse. And that's why they say trauma is not something that happened at a moment, but trauma continues happening until we make an active change of what's happening. So a lot of people keep living, just surviving in this world, but the trauma continues getting worse and worse, and the impact on our brain is worse, the deregulation is worse, because we are stuck in this cycle of trying to survive. And what that takes is to an early death. According to the CDC, people with several adverse experiences as a child died an average of 20 years earlier than those with no adverse childhood experiences. So sexual violence is a very big one. You can see this zero is zero amount of adverse experiences. You can see that the majority of people get to live to 65 years or more, and very few, the least amount of people die when they're young. However, those who have adverse experiences, you can see that very few get to be old. The great majority are dying between 19 to 49 years old. And that just shows, because of the risky behaviors, many times it takes to a premature death. So they tend to die 20 years early. So what it shows is that they live as survivors. It's a horrible life because it's just about surviving, just about coping every single day. It's so heavy to get out of bed, so heavy to go out of work. And it's like, not only it's a very difficult life to live, but then you end up dying earlier. So the impact of the trauma deregulates the nervous system and alters the structure and function of the brain. The foundation of healing and resilience is to bring healing to this deregulation. And that's where we need to focus. And I will explain a little bit more about this. Thus, if we want a true sustainable healing, we need to evaluate and accommodate our approaches to a neurophysiological perspective. And this is very important because if you think about people who went to war, to the veteran war, many years ago, they have been in therapy for so long, and you talk to them and they're still experiencing PTSD symptoms. They're still struggling to be able to fit in society. So it's like they've been going all this time to therapy, and the problem is that we keep using the same approaches expecting a different result. And we need to change an approach, and we need to modify an approach, and we need to change it based on what is science telling us and how do we change the neurophysiology. So what I'm talking about is that many therapists and the therapeutic community focus on this part. I don't know if you can see my mouse, but focus on what's evident, like the problems. For example, someone is having marital problems and they come to therapy and they work with the marital problem, or they have alcoholism and they work with a therapist and they get better with alcoholism. Guess what? A couple of months later, that same person is going to come back with another problem, smoking problems, or self-mutilation, or suicide ideation. So they go and they're trying to fix these problems. But what happens is that it doesn't matter what problem you fix, your body's still sending the wrong messages to you. And as long as the body's sending you the wrong messages, there's going to be another way to cope with those messages. So what we are approaching and what the polyvagal theory, which is what I'm going to talk next, does is saying, let's not focus on this. Let's focus on this part. How do we change the messages that the body is changing? How do we regulate this? How do we put this back to balance so that the messages that come in don't continue harming the physical and functional parts of the brain, and that automatically will eliminate all this. So we stop focusing. It's not about how do we change this behavior, what is wrong with you, and how do we fix it? Because when we focus on that, not only it is not helping, but it creates this sense of failure. I've been through so much therapy to teach me how to cope, to stop doing drugs, to be able to be less reactive. Everything that I've done, I have so much willingness, but I can't do it. So much, I want so much to have social interaction, but every time I go to a social place, I feel anxiety. I know in my mind I want to have some type of relationship, but my body fails me. And that just creates more resentment, more hatred toward yourself. And this just keeps getting worse. So we don't focus on this anymore. And the new science is showing this is a waste of time. Focus on the messages that we're doing. The good news is that focusing on changing the central system is a very simple action, which means anybody can do it. No matter who it is, everybody can do it. It is something simple that can be used, can be done by anyone. It's not easy because it requires persistence and effort and work, but it's simple because everyone can do it. So how do we change the central nervous system? How do we change our bodies from sending the wrong messages? And here's where the polyvagal theory helps us. The polyvagal theory allows us to know that if we change our physiological state and we modified our neuroceptions, and now I'm going to explain, neuroceptions is the things that we perceive of everything that's around us that is not conscious. So there's a lot of things, receptions that my body's taking in that I don't consciously perceive that my body's taking them in. So those neuroceptions are the things that will send messages to my brain without me really having a say of how I'm perceiving things. So I could be thinking about oh, I want to go to a party and I want to be around people, but my body sending signals to my brain, this is a very dangerous, anxious situation. And so I'm feeling anxiety, even though my frontal brain, my knowledge is telling me, I want to be here. Why can't I just be at peace here? Why am I feeling so anxious? And so we know that how can we change these neuroceptions that will help us change our nervous system? This means that we can alter the histories of our narratives of ourselves, others, and the world that surrounds us. So do I hate myself and I'm fear the world around me and everybody's here to attack me? Or do I love myself? I love living. I enjoy every single day. Life is beautiful. It's two ways of living. So a little bit about how this works is I'm going to touch a little bit of what we used to know about the sympathetic nervous system and how that has been changing with the latest neuroscience. So we previously knew about the sympathetic nervous system. Usually it was said that when we had a very a dangerous situation, like for example, I see a dog who wants to attack me, my sympathetic nervous system turns on and I think about fear and I think about run or so fight or flight. Do I run away or do I kick the dog? And so all my body gets ready for that. My heart starts pumping, my muscles get filled to be on active action. So I'm ready to fight or flight. And then we had what people say the parasympathetic nervous system, which is when things were calm, then my muscles would relax, would calm, and things would go back to being at ease. The truth is, it's not so easy because you can have the sympathetic nervous system activated and dominant in situations when it's positive, but it can also be activated when it's negative for fear situations. So for example, if the sympathetic nervous system, let's say there's a child who's about to jump a pool, and that same child can have the sympathetic nervous system activated and be super excited. You know, it's about to conquer a big fear and the heart is pumping right fast and the muscle is strong and everybody's cheering and the child is just so excited and it is a very positive situation. And so the sympathetic nervous system is activated, is dominant. But that same situation could be a child who is mortified, is so scared, the heart is pumping fast, adrenaline is running, the muscle is running, but that experience is mortifying, is horrific for this child. So that same experience can be totally different, and it depends only in one thing: whether or not the vagus nerve is activated. If the vagus nerve, the social nerve, is activated, then that is a positive situation, is a situation where you can learn, a situation where you're excited, that you enjoy. That exact same situation. That same exact situation can be totally terrifying if the vagus nerve is not activated. And so the same thing happens with the parasympathetic nervous system. So let's say we have the parasympathetic nervous system dominant, and the vagus nerve is activated, then it is a very pleasant thing. You are calm, you're resting, your heart is in such a peaceful mind of state. You just feel so at ease, like so calm. Or if the vagus nerve is, the ventral nerve is turned off, that person is in complete mortification where their body cannot react anymore. They have been so traumatized. The fear, the stress is so strong that the body has pretty much collapsed. So for example, if a child is going to be beat up by their father, or a child is going to be raped, they know, I cannot use my sympathetic nervous system. I cannot run and I cannot fight back. There's nothing I can do. So what happens? The body just pretty much collapses. And many of them, adopt the fetal position and try to protect your body, but the body has just completely collapsed. And all depends on whether or not the vagus nerve is activated. So the vagus is the 10th and longest cranial nerve, originating in the brainstem and traveling through the face, neck, lungs, heart, diaphragm, and abdomen, including the stomach, spleen, intestine, colon, liver, and kidneys. So I'm going to ask you, everyone, if you could just touch the places where the vagus nerve passes. So if you can touch your face, your neck, your lungs, your heart, your diaphragm, your abdomen, including your stomach, your spleen, your colon, liver, kidneys. So if you can touch them, just touch them. And now think about times where you have been in a fearful and stressed situation. These are the parts that show, your muscles, your neck gets tense, you feel like you can't breathe, your liver, you feel the knot in the stomach. So this is a very important nerve that will help us decide how we perceive a situation. And now something that I forgot to mention, but it's something very important, is we need one thing to have, to whether or not the vagal nerve is activated. If we feel safe, then it's activated. If we feel fear, then it deactivates, so that the other two systems can protect us, so that we can run and flight or go into a completely paralyzed position to try to save the organs, and we can survive whatever is going to happen to us. The vagus has more than 100,000 nerve fibers and communicates bidirectly between the brain and the body, with 80% of the fibers communicating from the body to the brain, and the other 20% communicating from the brain to the body. So this is so crucial, because remember how I said, it is the vagus that's telling the brain how we're feeling. And it is the vagus who's telling what we're perceiving from the world, so that the brain can decide, how do I react? So how the body perceives things is going to determine how our brain reacts, and then how our behaviors react and how we think about things. So if the ventral social engagement system, VEG, is activated, the person feels safe and compassion, our potential for learning is activated, our capacity for resilience is activated, our capacity for healing from trauma is activated. We feel at ease with ourselves, calm, centered. We have a desire to have connection, intimacy with others and with ourselves. It provides equilibrium between the sympathetic and the parasympathetic nervous system. It allows our brain to synchronize, feel empathy, helps us to create predictable, empathetic, harmonious, and authentic relationships. And something that's very interesting is that we perceive, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about this, but our vagus nerve perceives how your vagus nerve is by your voice, your posture, your breathing, your facial expressions. So those things are giving neuroceptions. And these are not things we can fake. We can't fake our voice. We can't fake our posture. There's things that our body reads, that our vagus read, that we can't fake, that we can't pretend to be activated, and the other person feels. And this is very common. If you are around people who are happy and are fun to be around, you start feeling happy and fun to be. You start feeling happy. But if you are around people who are depressive and complaining, you start feeling like that too. So we have these mirror neurons where we start our neuroceptions without being conscious. We start reading and mimicking the person that's in front of us. So this is very important, because if we want to activate and we want to help someone activate their vagus nerve, that means that ours has to be activated. that has to happen in order to happen. So let's say in a therapeutic situation, a counseling situation, I have to make sure that my vagus is activated if I want to be able to help and provide a space where the other person's vagus nerve is activated. And there's 3 organizing principles for the polyvagal theory. First is that it's a hierarchy. So when a person enters a situation, the first thing is the ventral vagal is activated, they feel confident. If for some reason there is some type of fear, then this one shuts down, and then the sympathetic nervous system starts acting. I am in danger, I need to fight or flee. And if this one doesn't work, then it goes into dorsal vagal, which is the same as the parasympathetic, and it means I can't cope. I'm collapsed and I shut down. So this is the order. This turns off, then this turns off, and then this stays. The other principle of the polyvagal theory is the neuroception, how our autonomic nervous system subconsciously evaluates and responds to cues of safety or danger in our environment. So that gut feeling that we sometimes have, I just feel anxious and I don't know why. I feel this, and you just feel it inside. So that's another principle. And the third principle is the co-regulation, the mutual regulation of physiological states between individuals. We need other individuals to learn to regulate ourselves. And so that is when we determine who we are around and how we're around, and when we want to be there for others, how do we want to be there? So everything is based on these 3 principles. This is how it works. The impact of trauma is that it impedes the ventral, the trauma deregulates our capacity to manage the polyvagal system appropriately. The body learns to be hyperactivated in the sympathetic or parasympathetic dorsal system. So we live as a trauma survivor, we live in these 2 states, always thinking fight or flight. And some people may say, oh, but I'm not fight or flight. But if I boom, do this and you jump, we are in that state. We are in that hyperactive, ready to react, ready to fight. Even though I may feel like, oh, I'm calm, I'm at all the time ready to jump. And this is going to change. For example, if you are walking with, and this is when the dorsal, when the ventral is not activated. If you are walking in the street and you hear the leaves move, immediately you're going to feel someone is out there. And you start thinking and feeling that you're not safe and you're ready. So all the time being ready to fight or flight. Someone in the office didn't say hi, it's because they don't like me. We're always perceiving everything that happens is going to attack me, which is a good thing of the body. It's a good thing of saying, how do I respond in dangerous situations? The problem is that we're no longer in that dangerous situations. We're no longer stuck in that event of the trauma, but we keep living as if we were. And that is the problem. How do we get out? And how do I recognize that what happened before is there and that now I am safe? How do I teach my body to say, I am safe? I can turn my vagal system on. When these 2 systems are in control, they impede the social engagement system, the dorsal vagal nerve, from bringing calm and biological equilibrium with feelings of security, trust, and desire to connect. So what are the implications of this polyvagal theory? The first one is that we need to understand our bodies. We need to understand our nervous system and the different decisions that our bodies are taking without us having much to say. For example, this idea of I want to have intimacy, but my body doesn't. I try everything to do or be the person I want to be, but I just can't. And so one of the big crucial things is that we all need to understand, how is my body working? So when we receive children and families who've been through traumatic experiences, they learn about the polyvagal theory. They learn about like, oh, what's happening? It's not me. It's not my lack of willingness. It's not my lack of strength that I can't change and be the person, is that my mind, my body is perceiving perceptions that are not real. My body's stuck, and how do I get it stuck? So that's the first thing, being conscious. Everybody, no matter whether they're being in a traumatic experience or not, everybody needs to understand how their body works, how the polyvagal theory works, because even if you're not, trying to work with yourself, the way that you are can bring healing to others. If you can activate your vagus system, you can bring healing to others just by being yourself. And so how can we become that healing community? The other implication that this has is that counselors, therapists must work vigorously on their own healing journey and be in sync with their vagus system. So that idea of I'm here to help you is going to immediately shut the vagus system for the person who comes to help, because there's that level of discrepancy of saying, I have to prove myself. I don't feel safe. When we can show we are broken community, we're all broken, we are wounded healers, that's when healing starts happening. So part of what we do in our program is that every therapist, every lawyer, every social worker that is in our program, they go on a rigorous training and work for a minimum of 100 hours per year. They also have to work weekly with their own personal healing, because depending on how they are in sync with themselves and in sync with getting to know themselves, that's going to help being there for others. So many times it's very easy for a therapist to say, oh, you should be doing this, you should be doing that, when we're not doing it ourselves. It is hard work. It is hard work to do, yoga practices or things that we are recommending. So in our program, it is crucial that anything that we recommend, anything that we do, we have to do it ourselves. And that we need to recognize that we are a wounded community and that we are wounded healers, and that my healing is bound to yours. And the other thing is that we need to use a systemic approach. And what I mean by this is that we cannot just expect, let's say that we have the best therapist ever. We cannot expect that that child feels safe and that the vagal nerve is activated only during that hour of session, and then go back home and that system is shut down and live in fear. We need to work with what surrounds the child, because the way to activate each other's vagal nerve is by having people who are in the same process of wanting to create that healing community. So part of our work is whenever we receive a child who's been sexually abused, we work with the mother, we work with the sisters, we work with a teacher, we work with whatever is surrounding this child, so that no matter where this child is, their vagus system can feel safe. There is someone that I am in the process of healing with. And so that's so important that we don't take into consideration the importance of working with the family, working with the system that surrounds this child, so that the healing can be sustainable, and that it's not only while they're in therapy, but it's for the rest of their lives, and they can create that bonding. And that our utmost priority is the activation of the vagal nerve. And this changes completely the way that we deal with things. So for example, laughter and play cannot happen if your vagal nerve is not activated. So how do we create spaces where there is laughter, where there's safety, where there's play, where they can feel life without pain, without fear is possible? I am in a safe place where I can play, where I can laugh. And when you do it with family members, when you do it with people who are important in your life, you start seeing that I am in a safe place. I'm not back living what I was living. And that's when your body starts perceiving different messages and sending different messages to the brain. I have I think someone has been sending. Okay. The second aspect of the second big theory, and I'm going to go through this very quick because I know I don't have a lot of time, is the bottom-up approach. So this bottom-up approach thinks about evolution. When evolution was happening, animals developed from the bottom up. First, they developed the brainstem, then they developed the limbic system, and then mammals developed the cortical brain. This same process happens when the baby's in the womb. The baby first develops the brainstem, then they develop the limbic system, then they develop the cortical system. And then this same thing happens once the baby's born. The first thing that is powerfully activated when they're born is reflexes and their sensory motor input for survival. That's what's activated. That's what matters. I want my milk, I want to be changed, and I want to sleep, like, you know, the basic things for survival. And as the baby's growing up, then these parts of the brain, the limbic brain, starts developing even more. And you can see the difference of a baby when they're little. It's easy to have a stranger carry them. The baby's okay, but about 6 months, the baby freaks out if they go to a stranger. And then the last one is the cortical brain, where the person starts to making reasonings. I want this, but I know it's not appropriate, and I'm not going to do it. So you know that 3 years old, 4 years old, they want it, they get it. It doesn't matter what they think. So their brain starts developing. So that's the same process of bottom up. It always starts from the bottom. Well, what we have found is that when trauma affects the brain, it affects the same way. It affects from the bottom up. First, our brainstem, all of our functions to survival, and then it goes all about our relationships, our surroundings, and lastly, all the way that we perceive the world and that we cognitively understand ourselves and understands others. One of the big problems with therapy, the way that it has been traditionally done, is that they're focusing on the cognitive thing. But as long as our survival, as long as we are in a survival mood, we will never be able to restore this, because our brain, just like with the having the vagus nerve inactive, is sending messages. I'm at risk. I'm going to die. Something's wrong with me. And so spending time sitting in a desk, talking to the person about what happened and how did it happen, let's try to understand and have a narrative of what happened, that's not going to help. And that's what we've seen. People who've been doing this for years, that's not helping. You will see that I've been going to therapy 20 years and I still have the same problems, or I have been doing this and I still don't feel joy to be alive. I struggle with anxiety because the brain is saying, I need to survive. So our approach is, we start from the bottom up. We have to first restore this part before going to the next levels. So really quick, some of the things that are affected by the brainstem is the way that we breathe. And this is very crucial. People who have been through trauma breathe different than people who have not been through trauma. For example, they tend to inhale more and exhale less. What is that doing? As we inhale more, we're activating the sympathetic, the fight and flight system all the time, just by the way we're breathing. So that's one of the receptions that we're giving our body, saying, it's not safe. It's not safe. It's not. Every time I breathe, I'm telling my body, saying, I'm not in a safe place. So we need to learn how to breathe again. Our sleep gets disturbed. And we all know that if you don't sleep well, the next day when you go to work, you're not going to be able to be functioning normal. You're going to be irritable. You're going to be upset. And so imagine these children, they're not. The breathing is telling you I'm not safe. They're not sleeping well. Their heart rate's not functioning well. It's all the time telling the body something's wrong. Something's wrong. The heartbeat is not working. Hormones are deregulated. They're having problem with digestion problems, posture problems. You start hunching. The more you hunch, the more pain it creates in your muscles. So it just like the body can't even think like, I am dying here. Who cares about how I think about it or how I create consciousness about what happened. No, my purpose is how do I survive? So that's where we focus first. If there's any deregulation on this, we can't focus on relationships, we can't focus on thinking, we can't focus on any of that until the body feels I am safe, I am okay to survive. And so, for example, and I'm just going to give very few examples because I know I don't have a lot of time. But for example, we start working with nutrition. We know that the gut is considered the second brain. In some circumstances, it should be considered the first brain because many of the neurotransmitters and are produced in the gut. For example, serotonin, which is something that makes the person feels happy. The majority of serotonin is produced by the gut. So it depends what we put in our stomachs, in our guts, that's going to tell us that's going to produce hormones and things that are going to make us feel in a certain way. One of the big things, for example, just as an example, because this can be a whole nother topic, but for example, sugar is a big thing that people eat. Sugar creates an inflammation in the brain. And so I just want you to think about when you've been sick and you have congestion and you feel your face inflamed, when you have inflammation, what do you want to do? You want to lay down, you want to be alone. And that is a very good thing the body does, is to protect you, is to protect from getting others sick, and also for you to rest. You don't want anything, you just want to lay down and your head's hurting. Well, this is what happens in our brain. Our brain is inflamed, we want to be isolated, we feel lethargic. And many times people are like, but why am I feeling like this? And then they go and take medication to see if it's anxiety, if it's depression, if it's this. And it is the body that's inflamed the whole time. Every time we put sugar to our body's inflamed. So when families and children understand this, they start changing their diet. So we start talking about how to decrease animal products or sugars or preservatives, and how to increase other things that actually produce energy to the body, and how the body, and so the body immediately, when you change the nutrition, the body starts feeling better. And it's a cycle. When you start feeling better, you want to be more active. And that's another thing. We know exercise is important, but if your body's hurting, it's almost impossible to want to do something. We also work a lot with breathing. That's so important for us. How do we learn breathing in a very calm settings like meditation, but in very active settings like dance and yoga? We work a lot with the sensory breathing, physical part of, like, for example, self-defense and sand play therapy and play therapy, and we have gyms. And so when we're talking about how do we get the body moving, telling someone, oh, you have to go exercise, is like, yeah, sure, I'm going to go exercise. Instead of that, we're like, okay, let's talk a little bit while we walk or while we're moving this, and we get the mom and the child doing this. Some of the things that are affected by when the limbic system, once we have been able to fix that of like, oh, I'm safe, then we start working in attachments. How do we work with the families? And remember, the families have also been through the traumatic experience. So they also need to regulate their brainstem. They need to activate all. So this is not about how do we fix the child or how to fix the child? No, we are all wounded. We're all messed up. And how do we work together to become a healing community? So that's where we work with the systemic approach. And by the time we work with those two, all these problems that they had about self-esteem and self-blame, self-doubt, depression, all those things eliminate because the child's feeling alive, they feel safe, and they have a community that are working with them to become a healing community for the rest of life. They have acquired tools that will go with them for the rest of their life. They feel good with themselves, they feel good with what's around them, and they realize, I'm not in that position. So really quick, this is the 6 areas that every child works with when they come. Is the personal healing that we talked about, the non-offending family, which is the systemic approach. We also include people important, like people from the school or friends. We also make sure that our children have education. 98% of our girls are graduating from high school, and many of them are going to higher education. So they have all the support in their schools and outside of schools. We work with them on economic independence, not only with the child, but with the family. We many times, because it's incest, we know that the mom needs the support to be able to support her daughter. Political activation, political participation activism. Many of the girls, by the time they get to the point where like, wow, I have been like dormant with all this, I want to make change. I want to be part of this change. And many of them become this new members who activate the vagus nerve for other new girls that are coming. Many of them become activists. Many of them have become really big things, like they have created big things in the country to change laws, to change policies. And we also work with their justice. How do we bring justice to the crimes that have been committed against them? Next week, you will be hearing about how we do the justice, which is a whole nother broad thing. How do we work with the justice and the prevention aspect of every case? So I'm just going to share a couple of pictures to show that it is a very hands-on when you go into our program.
Our second part of the presentation. So Brisa, if you want to continue your presentation, and then we can go to the Q&A part. To the Q&A part.
Perfect.
Mm-hmm.
So let me share it. So pretty much what I was talking about is how we approach it and how we use the polyvagal theory and the bottom-up approach.
Utilise cette théorie.
But we work in a very holistic way. We work with every aspect that impacts this child. And something that is very unique is that we don't have a time frame where they can come to our organization. So many organizations say, oh, for 6 months or 12 sessions. Once they come to our program, they're connected with us for lifelong. They can always come and go as they are moving in their life. And we're always there to support them, to continue encouraging them. And the most important part is that we have built a healing community around them so that they can continue for the rest of their lives. So in our personal healing, we use many methodologies like yoga, meditation, dance, phototherapy, traditional too. We use group therapies. We use breathing techniques. So what is interesting, we also use music. So it's very interesting because when you go to our program, it is a program where children, the children who arrive there are children who've experienced rape and horrible traumas. But you enter and you will hear laughter and music and dance. And it's like, it's so paradoxical. How can these children have the spaces where they can dream again and play again and be happy again? And that is our whole focus on how do we make this social engagement, the ventral vagus nerve, activated so that they feel that they are in a safe place, so that they can become healed with each other. We also work with the non-offending family. We do home visits. We work with parents and brothers and sisters and whoever is the non-offending family or important people in their lives. And what is so interesting is that many of these families then go into meeting other families, and it becomes a large healing community of how do we work with each other. We're all wounded, we're all broken, but we're all here because we want to be there for each other. We want to activate the social engagement, the ventral nerve, the ventral vagus nerve of how do we know that we are in a safe space where we can support each other. We also work with their education, making sure that they can finish their high school, support them after many of them are going to college. With their economic independence, we know a lot of the population that we receive are from extremely impoverished communities. And one of the things that trauma affects is the possibility of visualizing yourself as being economic independent. And many times that is what takes them to future violence, having to depend on someone. Many of them, their moms are part of their program so that they can start their own little business and support themselves. They go from having skill classes to learning how to do income and budgets and open bank accounts and open a small business, etc. We also have political participation, where how they can use their voices to create social change among their peers, but also in the community. For example, our children from our program and adolescents, they have created the Children and Adolescents Network Against Sexual Violence, and they have organized social movements. They have made political figures come together to make changes throughout the country. They have worked in schools to do the youth to youth program, where they help other youths to recognize sexual violence, how to disclose. So they become very involved, very engaged, very alive of saying, I want to make something different. I found myself. Everybody else needs to be able to find themselves and know that they're not alone. Property ownership, how do they have and other dreams? How do they dream again of the future? And that is like a small summary. You will hear more about the justice aspect and how do we do prevention. And I would like to know if you have any questions and whether we can go more in depth in any of the areas that you would like to talk about.
There was one comment or question of someone who said, I said in French, Je pense que partout.
I think that everywhere, as long as the environment is favorable, this is what we read in French, and we didn't really understand the meaning. So the person who has written, it doesn't appear. Can the person kindly open up their microphone and explain?
Spanish. I'm going to read it in Spanish. ¿Cuál es el rol?
What is the role of the judicial process to look for the healing?
Yeah, so one of the things that we talk about is that the healing process has to go along with the judicial process. There is no healing at the expense of the law. Next week, we have 2 hours where we will be focused specifically about the judicial process and how the judicial process is so important for the healing of the child and of the family, and how do we work with laws, policies, norms, and the judicial system precisely to be able to create healing. So that is a huge process on how we start with the restoration of the child and how we need to change our judicial systems and the understanding of this aspect to be able to continue the healing. So I'm not going to spoil the thing because we have 2 hours to talk about this next week. Yeah, so if there's any other questions, I'm happy to answer. Okay, so the next question is, how long should a psychiatrist, psychology therapy should be considered for a child to be healed? So it's important to consider that healing is a lifelong journey. So it's not about from this point to this point, I'm healed now. It's something that we work for the rest of our lives. How do we find more joy, that desire to feel alive? And I just want you to imagine, if you're a parent and you have a small child, you're gonna be like, Mom, look, a flower. And then 5 minutes later, they're like, Mom, look, the flower, and the excitement of, so even if it's the same flower they've seen like 10 times, but they just have so much excitement. And look at the tree. And you feel this joy of simply being alive, of exploring, of learning new things. That's what we're talking about. It's not just like, oh, I can be in a social situation and be okay. No, it's about really loving being alive, where it's so hard to fall asleep because you love being alive and you love being awake and you love participating and you love everything that you do. That's what we're talking about. So this healing is a lifelong journey. I think the part of therapy is how do we provide the child and the family the skills and the support and knowledge so that they can continue the healing process for the rest of their lives. So I don't think there's a time frame, but it is absolutely incredible and life-changing when we work with the systemic system. The level, the speed of the healing process is so much faster because we are activating the ventral vagus nerve and we are activating, the social engagement part of our life that helps us connect and feel that we're in a safe place and our body stops sending the wrong messages. So it really depends on how much family systems we are using to be able to give them the skills. And honestly, they are the ones who say, I think I'm ready. I want to go. And we've seen that, they start with very several sessions a week, and then they go into once a week, and then they go like once a month, and they by themselves see like, oh, I can do this on my own. We can do this as a healing community. And they by themselves start kind of decreasing. So I don't think there's a specific time.
Diana, do you provide any online therapy for children living in other regions of Bolivia?
No, right now, our program provides transdisciplinary services. So that means every child that gets to our program receives a lawyer, a psychologist, and a social work. So our program is transdisciplinary where all the areas are being worked together. And because of that, we only serve children that are within our jurisdiction to be able to work with the legal aspect of that case. So if they have started in our program and then they move somewhere else, yes, we do that. But we only work within the jurisdiction that we work in.
Please, the interpreters. Me gustaría saber.
I would like to know more about the relationship between the three brains and the work with the nervous vagus. So the relation between that is not clear to me.
So it's not that we have three brains, but that we have three systems or three aspects of the central nervous system. And so one part of nerves and one part of the system is sends signals to parts of our body. So the sympathetic nervous system sends signals to part of our body telling us that our body needs to be in active movement, either to defend ourselves and to fight, or whether it is a very active sport that we're going to be doing and having fun. But what it does is sends muscles where it says, you don't need to focus about digestion. You don't need to focus about, the organs right now. What you need is your muscles need to be ready. Your eyes needs to be dilated. Your heart needs to be pumping so that you can react and you can respond. Now, the other part of nerves that we have send other signals where it says, your eyes get constricted, your muscles have to be relaxed, your muscles, your organs, it stimulates activity, so you process food. And then we have the vagus nerve. So these are all the time activated in our bodies. But what takes control, or what is predominantly controlling, is what determines how we're perceiving things and how we are reacting to things. And it all has to do with whether the ventral vagus nerve, the social engagement nerve, is activated. If the ventral vagus nerve, which is the social engagement nerve, is activated, then everything that we perceive, everything that we're engaging, is going to be with the feeling of safe, and I will be able to learn from it, and I will be able to have a positive situation. If I'm going to a party, I'm going to enjoy that party. If I am going to the pool, I'm going to enjoy going to the pool. If this vagus, the social engagement, is not activated, then whatever the situation, even if it's a positive situation, it's a party, I am going to feel fear. I'm going to feel anxiety. I'm going to feel like things are not safe, and my body is going to be sending that message. And even though consciously I say, but it is a safe place, why am I feeling like this? I'm going to start feeling anxious. My heart is going to start palpitating. I'm going to feel like I want to throw up. My adrenal glands are going to be, stimulating. So it's just, my body's going to tell me something is not right, even though I have consciously say it is right. And many of us have done this, where you feel like, oh, something's not right. And many times it's associated with something. You forgot to bring a paper or something. But many times you just feel it, even though consciously it's like, there's nothing to worry about, but I'm feeling anxious. I'm feeling depressed. I'm feeling like attacked. And so all depends of whether or not we can activate the ventral vagus nerve, the social nerve. So how do we create safe environments where the person and the child feel I am in a safe place, so that the new environment in which they stuck doesn't send signals of this is dangerous, I need to fight and flight. And so they start becoming healing spaces and positive attitudes, and start incorporating that I'm not stuck in the past. I don't have to react like if I was stuck in the past. This is a different reality.
Très instructive et pratique.
It's really very instructive and practical to basically test this on yourself in your daily life and help children. So to start from yourself. Thank you very much, Brisa. Do you have any partners in Africa or other centers where this therapy has been used in Africa?
So
any
no
partners.
I mean, we don't have like a specific partner, but this is not something that we are like the only ones using. There's a lot of programs in the United States and that are using, the polyvagal theory. Actually, is becoming the dominant way of understanding how to work with traumatized children. Then we also have a lot of other programs that work with the systemic model of how to work with the larger system, but it's very few the ones that put them together and put these things. And that's one of the things that we've spent the last 20 years. We always are looking for what are the best practices, and then trying to see what actually works and how it works, and based it on not so much on the throwing the darts, but is there scientific proof on this? Is this logical with what's happening on the brain? How do we understand the trauma? So we don't have a specific partner in Africa. We do provide a lot of trainings to staff members on how to approach. We also have created a lot of protocols of, which is something very important, especially in the therapeutic arena, where the therapist goes in the room and you have no idea what they're doing, but we have a very systematic protocol. How do you receive a person? What are the things that you work in? And then we have a very systematic protocol of what are the topics that we work? How do we work with the family? How do we give them the tools? So we have a lot of very practical things that can be replicated by other institutions. Okay, so what is the role of health self-group. So this is crucial. If we think about where have we seen the most impact in healing communities, we tend to see that they are done in self-groups. So for example, AA community, Alcohólicos Anónimos, Alcoholic Anonymous, or Narcotic Anonymous, or people who've been through, you know, a crash accident together, and then they help each other. And so this has shown that there is the level of healing is much higher, much more sustainable, much more powerful than when there's this discrepancy of like therapist and client. The reason is because when we are with someone, with a similar peer who understands our pain, who understands what I'm going through, they don't care. They don't care about what the facts are. And this is very important for therapy. It doesn't matter what the impact or what the trauma actually was. It doesn't matter if it was in one room or in another room, or how it was done and how many times. Like those facts that most people care really doesn't matter. And that's what other survivors understand. It doesn't matter. What matters is how that whatever happened is impacting you today, to have a life today. And how do we change that so that whatever happened is not affecting you every day? So when you meet someone who's been in similar situations, they feel and understand the pain without having to use words. They know how it feels to not have the desire to stand up from bed every day, how hard it is to think about going to work. They just understand. You don't have to talk about it. You don't have to explain it. And then the focus is how to make sure that we have the tools and the support and understanding that can help us have a better life today and tomorrow. And that's a big difference with a therapist. Many times a therapist want to understand why you're acting this way. And to understand, you need to know the facts and talk about what happened. And that really doesn't matter. What matters is how that impacted you. And that's what we see with self-help groups, survivors helping survivors, and families helping families or supporting families. When they understand that my healing is bound to yours, something magical happens, because we already know how it feels, but we also know how amazing it feels that you get me. I don't have to prove myself. I don't have to give you explanations. You get me, and we can work together. And that feeling of compassion, that feeling of safety, of I don't have to prove myself, is what's activating the social engagement and is proving the person that we're not stuck in the trauma anymore. So that's why it's so important to use self-help groups.
At the Bolivian level, at the national level, what kind of achievements did you get, on the legislation level, on perhaps support services for victims, in order to generalize your practice, your experience?
Yeah, so there's a lot of things from the macro. For example, from the very basic, we can see the transformation of a child. Like 70% of the children are improving self-esteem, 80% within the first year, 80% are improving their sleep behavior. So we have this like day-to-day personal things. In a more macro way, we have been able to, for example, we have a 95% conviction rate, which is the highest in the world. We know that sexual crimes are the most underreported and the least conviction rates there is. So, for example, in the United States, it ranges from 7 to 15% of cases that go to court and in conviction, and those are really high. We have a 95% conviction rate. So it also shows how this working with the systemic and the holistic child helps with the process of going to court. We've also been able to change several laws, and that's something that we continue to do. For example, the marriage law, where the aggressor was pardoned for raping a child if they got to marry that child with the rapist. We've been able to do in my own case, which was where the aggressor was the one interrogating the victim at trial. And that was happening all the cases before me. And in my case, we took it to the Constitutional Court and we were able to claim that as unconstitutional. Now it has to be a lawyer questioning the victim, not the aggressor. So there's a lot of laws that we've been changed, public policies that we've been changed. But one of the big things also right now for the region is that I've taken my case up to the Inter-American Court. So it's been I've been taking my case for 20 years and it finally was accepted by the Inter-American Court, which we'll be hearing this year or next year. And what we're asking is how to create, it's the first case of its kind that ever reaches that court. And the resolution of the court will have an impact in the entire region of what is the standards of management of cases of incest and what is what's expected from governments to respond to these cases. For example, what kind of training they have to have. We know that most of the people who deal with sexual violence in the government are not specialized on this topic, and sexual violence is a very different type of crime. You have to be specialized on that topic. What kind of training they need, how do we need to respond in a systemic approach, how do we involve them? So it's creating standards for all of the governments in the Americas of what is the minimum of what a government needs to produce. We also work a lot with the international community as to create policies. We use a lot of our experience to, like for example, we have been reached by the CDC or other organizations to say, these are some of the things we want to implement, but you are on a day-to-day work. Is this reasonable? Is this going to work? So we're constantly providing our expertise to show like, this is not going to work, or this is going to work, or this is how we can modify it. So we work a lot with the international community in providing training and back and forth of how do we share what we're doing. So we've also been able to do a lot of research publications, over 20 books on the topic. So that also helps a lot to other organizations who want to learn more about this.
Thank you, Brisa. We have one question in Spanish and one in French. So for the Spanish, if you could explain more about the work with the family system. And the other one is if you could explain more about the bottom-up approach.
The bottom-up approach.
Yeah.
Okay. So the bottom-up approach is pretty much working on, we have to deal first with the most basic things before we start dealing with understanding the cognitive or the relations or anything. We need to start dealing with things. We can't work with a child if they're not breathing properly. We can't work with a child who has the posture of like, I'm threatened. We can't work with a child who is not sleeping well and is feeling like everybody's going to attack me. So the first thing is like, how do we tell that body you are in a safe place? That's before anything, which is very different from what happens traditionally. Traditionally is you come to the office and we're going to talk. And when you're talking, you're using your frontal lobe. That's what you're using. That's what's activated. So we're constantly trying to talk about what's happening, but that's not helping. We first need to tell the body and say, we need to change the physiology of the body, what we put inside of our body, how our body's producing certain types of chemicals, and that is going to automatically open us to the next part, which is how do we live in a community? How do I relate with my parents? How do I relate with others? How do I relate with this person who is here, with other survivors? And then we can start talking about how you interpret things or what you think about things and how you logic. So that's the bottom-up approach, which is the opposite of what has been done for now. Now the approach has been done top-bottom. Let's talk about it, and thinking that talking about it is going to change the way you feel about things. We know that's different. The way you feel about things, the way you feel is going to change how you think about things. So that's the bottom-up approach. The other question about the family systems, it is crucial because, again, we want we cannot create dependence relationships. And for me to be able to activate, as a stranger, to activate the ventral vagus, the social engagement system, is going to be so much harder than the child's mom activating it. But for that, the mom has to first activate her own, because the mom is full also with a lot of traumas from her past, from what's happened. And so we need to work with the family. But then there's also brothers and sisters who may be making the child feel not safe. And there's also a teacher when I'm at school. So how do we create this system so these important people in the child's family come to our program, or we go to them and we work on different areas, so that it's step by step. And we have this protocols of like what's the first step and what they do and how they work, and they have homework and they work together and they try it out and they recognize what are the roots of the problems that are happening. And so the family starts developing skills and practices where they can solve their own problems, where they can find their own solutions. It's not the therapist. It's not therapy who's like recognizing this is the problem and this is how we solve it. No, it's the own family working together. So by working with the family and the social system, we are making sure that this child social engagement is continuous activated no matter where they are. And it is for the rest of their lives, because want it or not, there's going to be a lot of other adversities in their lives. You know, adversities keeps coming, but if they know how to respond to it and they know how as a family to work with it, they will find their own solution and their own healing. So that's why we pay so much emphasis on working with the child and the system, and not see it as we need to fix the child. No, we are a healing community. We are wounded healers.
I remind you to all of you that in the Moodle platform of the online training, we have more information about A Breeze of Hope Foundation. We have 2 videos, very nice and interesting videos that you could watch in English for those who understand English. We will have next week the second session also with A Breeze of Hope Foundation with Parker. So you have a week if you want also to think about other questions. I think we could continue next time. So there is a lot of thank yous in the chat box. Merci. Thank you, Brisa, for your valuable information. I think maybe we can conclude, if it is okay for you, Brisa.
Absolutely, yeah. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you very much, Brisa, for this valuable reach and for sharing your experience. Thank you very much. Thank you very much also to the interpreters, Lucrecia and Hilaria. And thank you to everyone. I hope you've enjoyed this training. And we see you next week for the second part of the presentation. And thanks to everyone for your participation. Have a nice evening or day, depending on your location. And hasta luego. Au revoir. Tous.